At exactly 3 a.m. on August 26th, 1303, 8,000 women began walking into the flames at Chittor Fort. The fire roared 30 feet high, casting an orange glow visible for miles across the Rajasthan plains. Inside the fortress, women aged 13 to 60 moved in an organized procession toward the specially constructed pyre. They wore their finest silk saris and heaviest gold jewelry, not for celebration, but because they knew their bodies would be unrecognizable ash within hours. The drums thundered a funeral rhythm as the first wave of women stepped forward. Mothers clutched their daughters' hands. The queen led the procession, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. This wasn't panic or chaos. This was a methodical, pre-planned annihilation. 8,000 women had voted unanimously. Burning alive was preferable to what awaited them when the fortress walls fell. The youngest girls went last, held in their mothers' arms, some too young to understand why the women around them were singing death hymns. The flames consumed silk and skin with equal hunger. How did humanity create conditions where burning alive became a better option than living? Why did civilization repeatedly make female existence so unbearable that death was mercy? To understand this coordinated annihilation, we must rewind through centuries of escalating female horror, starting with the everyday tortures that killed women one breath at a time. The factory whistle shrieked at 5 a.m., and Mary knew she had exactly 3 minutes to lace her corset tight enough to keep her job. In Manchester's cotton mills, the year 1847 brought a new level of female suffocation. Factory owners demanded 18-inch waists, not for beauty, but for practicality. Narrow waists meant women could squeeze between the spinning machines, clearing cotton dust and retrieving dropped bobbins. Mary pulled the laces until her ribs creaked. Each breath became a calculated effort. The foreman, Mr. Hartwell, made his morning rounds, measuring waists with a tape measure. Any woman over 20 inches received a dock in pay. Over 22 meant dismissal. Mary had witnessed Sarah Collins faint yesterday, her lips blue from oxygen deprivation. The machines never stopped spinning. Sarah's body was dragged to the corner, while her station was filled within minutes. 14-hour shifts in corsets that compressed organs into unnatural positions. Ribs permanently deformed into question marks. Lungs operating at half capacity. Here's the thing about Victorian female labour. The torture was perfectly legal. Women's wages automatically belonged to their husbands or fathers. Mary earned 6 shillings weekly, but never saw a penny. Her father collected her wages every Friday, usually already drunk from the advance he'd drawn against them. The corset wasn't just clothing. It was a metal and whalebone cage that mirrored the legal cage surrounding every working woman. But the corset was just the beginning of her daily torture. The machines themselves became instruments of destruction. Loose hair meant scalping. Long skirts meant entanglement. Last month, Lucy Morrison's crinoline caught in the gears. The massive steel hoops under her skirt wound into the machinery, pulling her body into the mechanism. The engine couldn't be stopped quickly enough. Workers found fragments of fabric and flesh scattered across 3 different machines. The factory owner deducted the cleaning costs from Lucy's final wages. Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson documented the medical catastrophe in his 1887 study. Factory women suffered prolapsed uteruses at 8 times the rate of non-working women. Compressed organs led to digestive failure. Restricted breathing caused chronic fainting, which caused accidents, which caused deaths. The numbers were staggering. 3,000 women annually died from what doctors euphemistically called industrial exhaustion. But wait, it gets worse. The Factory Act of 1844 legally limited women's work to 12 hours daily, but owners found loopholes. Cleaning time didn't count. Preparation time didn't count. Women arrived at 5 a.m. and left after 9 p.m., their actual working hours hidden in creative accounting. The powder used to whiten the cotton contained lead. Women inhaled it for 14 hours, their lungs slowly poisoning while their corsets prevented them from coughing it out. What happened next would haunt factory inspectors for decades. The Triangle Shirtwaist tragedy in New York would later shock the world, but England had its own locked-door murders decades earlier. Factory owners bolted doors to prevent theft, which meant preventing exhausted women from stepping outside for air. When fire broke out at Hutchinson's mill in 1854, 43 women died against the locked doors, their corsets preventing them from squeezing through windows that healthy lungs might have permitted. Mary survived 6 years in the mills. She died at 22 from what doctors called mill fever, their term for respiratory failure caused by cotton dust and lead poisoning. Her father collected her death benefit of 2 shillings. Her 18-inch waist measurement was noted in the factory records as satisfactory until termination. If Victorian women thought factory life was hell, they had no idea what their medieval sisters endured when religion itself turned against them. Catherine of Siena weighed 68 pounds when they declared her a saint, her bones visible through translucent skin. In 1380, the Church called her emaciation holy beauty. Young girls across Europe took notice. If you wanted to escape marriage, avoid rape, or simply be taken seriously, you starved yourself for God. Catherine consumed only communion wafers and pus from the sick. She called it feasting on Christ's suffering. The convents of medieval Europe became competitive starvation centres. Sister Columba of Rieti ate nothing but communion hosts for 7 years. Her fellow nuns weighed her weekly, celebrating each lost pound as evidence of divine favour. Angela of Foligno drank the water used to wash lepers' wounds. She described the scabs floating in it as sweet as the Eucharist. The Church published these accounts as inspiration for young women. Now here's where it gets truly insane. The bishops created official guidelines for holy anorexia. The body must show specific signs. Amenorrhea proved virginity. Protruding bones demonstrated rejection of earthly temptation. Fainting during prayers showed spiritual ecstasy. Doctors were forbidden from intervening. Force-feeding was considered sacrilege. Parents who tried to feed their starving daughters faced excommunication. The physical effects were documented in gruesome detail by the very priests who encouraged it. Hair fell out in clumps, teeth loosened and dropped, skin developed a greenish tinge from organ failure. Hearts beat irregularly, but these were celebrated as mortifications of the flesh. Young girls lined up to join convents, seeing starvation as their only path to autonomy. But Catherine wasn't alone in her deadly devotion. Margaret of Cortona carved the word Jesus into her chest with a knife, then refused food until the wounds festered. She called the infection perfume for Christ. Clare of Assisi ate so little that she stopped menstruating at 15. The Church declared this proof of her purity. Word spread through medieval Europe. If you wanted to avoid an arranged marriage, you stopped eating. If you wanted your words taken seriously, you starved until prophecies came from your hallucinogenic visions. The numbers are staggering. Between 1200 and 1500, over half of all female saints were extreme fasters. Thousands of unnamed girls died imitating them. Convents kept careful records of successful starvations. Sister Beatrice of Nazareth died at 31, weight unknown but described as light as communion bread. Sister Ida of Louvain died at 28, survived on tree bark for her final year. Sister Juliana of Cornillon died at 35, consumed only the Eucharist for 5 years. The bishop's response would institutionalize starvation. In 1495, the Church published The Miraculous Abstinence of the Holy Virgins, a guide for achieving sainthood through self-starvation. It detailed exact protocols. Begin by eliminating meat, progress to eliminating everything but bread. Finally, sustain yourself on the Eucharist alone. The book included helpful tips for hiding food to avoid forced consumption and prayers to resist hunger pangs. Distributed to convents across Europe, it became a manual for mass slow suicide. The most horrifying aspect wasn't the starvation itself, but the theological framework that made it logical. Women's bodies were inherently sinful. Eve's appetite had doomed humanity. Therefore, female hunger was especially dangerous. By conquering appetite completely, women could partially atone for original sin. This wasn't fringe theology. It was mainstream doctrine taught from every pulpit. Young girls learned that their very desire for food was evidence of spiritual corruption. While nuns starved for God, other women burned for crimes that existed only in their neighbors' dreams. Sarah Good's neighbor testified, "I dreamed she flew through my window as a yellow bird," and the judge nodded. In Salem, 1692, dreams became death sentences. The court accepted spectral evidence. If you appeared in someone's nightmare, you hanged for it. Sarah, a homeless beggar with a 4-year-old daughter, made the perfect target. Poor women always did. The economics were simple. Accused witches' property was seized and redistributed. Sarah Good owned nothing, but Sarah Osborne had land. Rebecca Nurse had significant holdings. Soon, any woman with property found herself in someone's convenient nightmare. Ann Putnam Jr., just 12 years old, became Salem's most prolific dreamer. She testified against 62 people. Her father somehow acquired 3 new plots of land during the trials. Listen to this twisted logic. The court ruled that the devil could not take an innocent person's form. Therefore, if someone saw you in a spectral form committing evil, you must have given the devil permission. The only way to prove innocence was to confess guilt. Those who confessed lived. Those who maintained innocence hanged. Sarah Good refused to confess to crimes she hadn't committed. But dreams were just the beginning of Salem's madness. The physical examinations defied comprehension. Women were stripped naked and examined for devil's marks, any mole, birthmark, or skin irregularity. Magistrates pricked these marks with needles. If the woman didn't scream loudly enough, it proved the devil had numbed her. If she screamed too loudly, it proved the devil was fighting back. Martha Carrier had a small birthmark on her shoulder. The examiner declared it a teat for suckling familiars. She hanged based on that mole. The trials revealed something darker about community dynamics. Young girls discovered ultimate power. Their fits and visions could destroy any adult woman. Abigail Williams perfected the performance. She would shriek, convulse, and claim to see the accused woman's spectre choking her. Other girls quickly learned the script. Their synchronized performances became Salem's deadliest theater. Here's the part historians downplay. The gender statistics. Of the 200 accused, 78% were women. Of the 20 executed, 14 were women. The age range tells another story. Accused women averaged 47 years old, past childbearing age, often widowed or economically independent. These were women who no longer fit neat social categories. Women who owned property. Women who spoke their minds. Giles Corey's final words would echo through history. Giles Corey, the only man pressed to death, died protecting his wife Martha. By refusing to enter a plea, he prevented the court from seizing their property. For 3 days, they piled stones on his chest. His last words, "More weight." He died, ensuring Martha's inheritance would pass to their children. Martha hanged anyway, but she died knowing Giles had fought the system with the only weapon he had, his silence. The aftermath revealed the economic motivations. Sheriff George Corwin enthusiastically seized property from the accused. He took everything: land, livestock, household goods, even children's toys. When the trials ended, he'd accumulated a fortune. The Putnam family consolidated significant land holdings. The accusers' families mysteriously prospered, while the accused families were destroyed. Salem was merely practice for what Europe would perfect into an extermination system. The Malleus Maleficarum contained 117 different torture techniques, each illustrated with precise diagrams. Published in 1486, this witch hunter's manual became Europe's second best-selling book after the Bible. The authors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, created a systematic guide for femicide. They explained why women were naturally prone to witchcraft. All wickedness is but little to the wickedness of a woman. The manual's core premise, women's inherent weakness, made them susceptible to demonic influence. Their slippery tongues spread evil. Their carnal lust invited possession. Their jealous nature led to curses. Every female trait became evidence of potential witchcraft. The book provided helpful charts for identifying witches, women who were too poor, too rich, too ugly, too beautiful, too quiet, too talkative. Essentially, any woman could qualify. Page 73 described a technique so horrific that even hardened torturers initially balked. The strappado involved tying a woman's hands behind her back, attaching weights to her feet, then hoisting her by her wrists until her shoulders dislocated. The manual suggested adding supplements, burning feathers under the nose, forcing gallons of water down the throat, or applying hot irons to sensitive areas. The instructions included optimal weight ratios and pulley configurations for maximum pain without immediate death. The goal was confession, not quick execution. The mathematics of murder are staggering. Historians estimate 40,000 to 60,000 executions across Europe, with women comprising 80% of victims. Germany's witch hunts were particularly efficient. The town of Quedlinburg burned 133 women in a single day in 1589. Würzburg executed 400 women between 1626 and 1631, including girls as young as 7. One German village ended up with only 2 women left alive. But here's what made the malleus truly insidious. It created economic incentives for accusations. Witch hunters received payment per conviction. Torturers earned bonuses for confessions. Town officials kept portions of seized property. The manual helpfully explained how to structure these payments to ensure maximum efficiency. A confession extracted in under 3 days earned double fees. But the real profit came from confiscated property. The property seizure system was brilliant in its cruelty. The manual specified that investigations themselves justified asset freezing. Accused women couldn't pay for defense because their money was already confiscated. Their families couldn't help because association meant accusation. The witch hunters' fees came from the seized assets, creating a self-funding extermination system. Rich widows made especially profitable targets. Some women found ways to resist. The manual complained about stubborn witches who died under torture without confessing. These women understood that confession meant implicating others. By dying silent, they broke the chain of accusations. The manual recommended specific techniques for breaking such resistance: threatening their children, torturing family members in their presence, or using specialized implements designed for women's bodies. The malleus remained in active use for nearly 300 years. The last official witch execution in Europe occurred in 1782, Defecar, Anna Goldie, in Switzerland. By then, the manual's techniques had evolved into medical procedures. The same restraints, examinations, and tortures reappeared in different contexts. Centuries later, doctors would find new ways to torture women, this time calling it medicine. Dr. Baker's scalpel hovered over her clitoris as he explained, "This will cure your reading addiction." In 1858 London, doctors had discovered the source of female hysteria, TZ, sexual organs that distracted from proper submission. Dr. Isaac Baker Brown pioneered clitoridectomy as treatment for dozens of female ailments: reading too much, masturbation, homosexuality, divorce desires, and general unruliness. The medical establishment enthusiastically embraced his theories. The symptoms requiring surgical intervention were conveniently broad. Did she argue with her husband? Sexual organs inflamed. Did she prefer books to needlework? Clitoral hypertrophy. Did she show insufficient enthusiasm for motherhood? Nymphomania, requiring immediate surgery. Dr. Brown performed these operations on women as young as 10 and as old as 70. The procedure took 8 minutes without anesthesia. Patients were held down by nurses while Dr. Brown removed the clitoris with scissors. He published case studies celebrating his success rates. Patient X, age 23, complained of nervous exhaustion caused by excessive novel reading. Post-surgery, she showed complete cure, meaning she no longer requested library books. Patient Y, age 31, exhibited conjugal resistance. After surgery, she became properly submissive to marital duties. Here's the truly insane part. This was considered progressive medicine. Dr. Brown wasn't a fringe practitioner. He served as president of the Medical Society of London. His book, On the Curability of Certain Forms of Insanity, Epilepsy, Catalepsy, and Hysteria in Females, went through multiple editions. Medical schools taught his techniques. Doctors across Europe and America adopted his methods. The procedure took 8 minutes without anesthesia. But clitoridectomy was just one tool in medicine's war on female autonomy. Dr. William Goodell perfected normal ovariotomy, removing healthy ovaries to cure mental illness. His reasoning: ovaries caused female emotions. Remove the ovaries, cure the hysteria. He performed hundreds of these operations, creating detailed charts showing improved temperament in the survivors. The mortality rate approached 25%, which he considered acceptable for curing female disorders. The asylum system provided endless subjects for experimentation. One signature from a male relative meant lifetime imprisonment. Husbands discovered the convenient disposal method for inconvenient wives. Elizabeth Packard's husband signed the papers while she slept. She woke up in Jacksonville Insane Asylum, diagnosed with religious excitement and novel reading. Her real crime: disagreeing with her minister husband about theology. She spent 3 years fighting for release, documenting the horrors she witnessed. Elizabeth secretly compiled notes revealed systematic medical torture, cold water baths lasting hours until patients lost consciousness, force feeding through nasal tubes that lacerated throats, restraint chairs that cut off circulation, rotation therapy, strapping women to boards and spinning them until they vomited blood, tranquilizing chairs that prevented all movement for days. Doctors carefully documented which techniques most quickly achieved feminine compliance. The economics reinforced the system. Asylums received payment per patient from families or parishes. Long-term residents generated steady income. Cured patients meant lost revenue. Dr. Thomas Kirkbride designed asylums specifically to prevent escape, AIS, high walls, barred windows, isolated locations. His architectural plans spread across America. By 1880, over 100,000 women were institutionalized, many for crimes like political excitement or suppressed menstruation. But even medical torture paled compared to what revolutionary France did to women who dared speak of equality. Olympe de Gouges watched them sharpen the guillotine blade that would silence her demands for women's rights. November 3rd, 1793. I May. The revolution that promised liberty, equality, and fraternity prepared to execute a woman for taking those words seriously. Her crime: publishing the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of the Female Citizen. She dared suggest that if women could be executed equally, they should participate in government equally. The crowd gathered early at Place de la Révolution. Public executions had become Paris's primary entertainment, but female political prisoners drew special audiences. The Revolutionary Tribunal had condemned Olympe for having forgotten the virtues that belonged to her sex. The prosecutor Fouquier Tinville specifically cited her attempt to form women's political clubs. Such organizations threatened the natural order more than any royalist plot. Here's what makes this betrayal particularly cruel. Women had fought for the revolution. They'd marched on Versailles, demanding bread and justice. They'd stormed the Bastille alongside men. They'd donated jewelry to fund the revolutionary armies. They'd knitted stockings for soldiers and rolled bandages for the wounded. But when they asked for basic rights, to vote, to divorce abusive husbands, to control property, the revolutionary government turned on them. Her last pamphlet, hidden in her cell, contained words that would outlive her executioners. The pamphlet read, "Woman is born free and lives equal to man in her rights. Social distinctions can be based only on common utility." Simple words that signed her death warrant. The revolutionary government had closed all women's political clubs just days before her arrest. The Jacobins declared that women's political participation violated nature itself. Robespierre himself proclaimed that women's place was in the home, raising citizens, not becoming them. Other women faced the same fate. Manon Roland went to the scaffold for hosting political salons. Her last words: "O liberty, what crimes are committed in thy name?" Charlotte Corday was executed for assassinating Marat, but her real crime was acting politically while female. The artist who painted her severed head noted how the executioner had slapped it, a final insult reserved for women who'd stepped outside their prescribed roles. But it gets worse. The revolutionary government didn't just execute politically active women, it created new laws to control all women. The 1792 divorce law, initially progressive, was modified to prevent women from leaving abusive marriages too easily. Property rights that briefly allowed women control over dowries were rescinded. The government mandated that women wear cockades to show revolutionary loyalty, then arrested them for the masculine act of wearing political symbols. The crowd's reaction revealed something darker about human nature. The execution crowds showed particular cruelty toward female prisoners. They composed obscene songs about Olympe's body. They shouted sexual threats at women mounting the scaffold. Marie Antoinette faced pornographic pamphlets about her supposed perversions. The revolutionary press published detailed descriptions of female prisoners' bodies, focusing on breasts and genitals rather than their political beliefs. This sexualized violence served a purpose. It reminded all women that political participation led to sexual humiliation and death. The aftermath was swift and thorough. Within months of Olympe's execution, the revolutionary government banned women from attending political meetings. They couldn't gather in groups larger than 5. They couldn't petition the government. They couldn't speak at political gatherings. The very revolution that proclaimed universal human rights specifically excluded half of humanity. French women wouldn't gain the vote for another 150 years. A century and a half later, fascist Spain would perfect the art of punishing women through their children. The nun smiled as she told Maria, "Your baby died," while Maria could hear infant cries from the next room. In Franco's Spain, 1943, political enemies were punished through their wombs. The regime systematically stole children from Republican mothers, declaring them unfit to raise Spanish citizens. Maria Gutierrez had given birth 3 hours earlier in Madrid's Santa Cristina maternity clinic. The nuns told her the baby was stillborn. They'd already filled out adoption papers for a proper nationalist family. The system operated with bureaucratic efficiency. Dr. Antonio Vallejo Nájera, Franco's chief psychiatrist, had scientifically proven that Marxism was a mental illness transmitted through mothers. His studies on female political prisoners concluded that Republican women carried the criminaloid gene. The solution was simple: remove their children immediately after birth. Place them with ideologically pure families. Save Spain's racial hygiene. The numbers are staggering. Historians estimate 300,000 children stolen between 1936 and 1990. But here's what the statistics hide: the intimate cruelties. Nurses would show mothers dead babies kept frozen for this purpose. They'd forbid mothers from seeing supposed graves. They'd drug women during labor so memories were hazy. The adoption papers were already signed before labor began. The Patronato de Protección a la Mujer added another layer of control. This protection board monitored young women for signs of moral deviation. Their definition of deviation: wearing pants, smoking, reading foreign books, or expressing political opinions. Girls could be removed from families deemed insufficiently Catholic. The Protection Board subjected them to redemption programs, essentially forced labor in convents while nuns arranged adoptions for any children they bore. The daily humiliations were precisely calculated. Women in nationalist prisons faced mandatory virginity examinations, even elderly women, and those who'd borne multiple children. The exams weren't medical, they were demonstrations of power. Guards forced political prisoners to sing fascist hymns while naked. They shaved women's heads in patterns that marked them as reds. They administered castor oil to cause uncontrolled diarrhea, then denied bathroom access. What the Protection Board did next shocked even Franco's generals. The Protection Board created a point system for female redemption. Attending mass-earned points. Informing on fellow prisoners earned double points. Sexual submission to guards earned the most points, though this was never officially documented. Women who accumulated enough points might see their children during supervised visits. Those who resisted lost all contact. Some women played the system for decades, never knowing their children had been adopted within days of birth. Carmen Marquez discovered the truth 40 years later. Her daughter, supposedly dead in 1950, had lived 3 blocks away her entire life. The adoptive parents were neighbors who'd paid the clinic 100,000 pesetas. Carmen had passed her daughter on the street thousands of times. The girl had been told her birth mother was a prostitute who'd abandoned her. When they finally met, Carmen showed her the grave she'd visited every week for 40 years. It contained the bones of a stillborn boy from another family. The Stolen Children Network involved every level of society. Doctors falsified death certificates. Priests modified baptismal records. Nuns ran trafficking rings. Government officials processed false documents. The system continued until 1990, evolving from political punishment to simple profit. Poor women were told their babies died. Rich families received healthy infants. The Catholic Church coordinated transfers and destroyed evidence. But the Nazis would industrialize female destruction in ways Franco could only dream of. The Ravensbrück doctor carefully pressed glass shards into her surgical incision, taking notes on infection rates. Dr. Karl Gebhardt needed data on wound contamination for the German army. Where better to gather it than the women's concentration camp? Władysława Karolewska, a 19-year-old Polish resistance member, was selected for the experiments in 1942. The doctors called them rabbits, test animals for surgical studies. The experiments followed strict protocols. First surgery. Create wounds mimicking battlefield injuries. Insert foreign objects, glass, wood splinters, dirt, bacterial cultures. Sew up the wounds. Document infection progression. When subjects survived, perform additional surgeries. Break bones and test healing rates. Sever nerves and observe paralysis patterns. Remove muscles and study adaptation. The women compared scars during secret meetings, realizing they were living medical textbooks. But here's what made Ravensbrück uniquely horrific. It was designed specifically for women. The medical blocks included equipment for forced sterilization experiments. Dr. Karl Clauberg injected caustic substances into wombs, testing which formula most efficiently destroyed fertility. Women writhed in agony as their reproductive organs burned from within. He carefully noted which solutions caused permanent sterility versus temporary inflammation. But the women had been stealing gunpowder, grain by grain. The women of Ravensbrück organized the impossible and distance in a death camp. Smuggling gunpowder from the munitions factory required extraordinary coordination. Each woman stole amounts so tiny they couldn't be detected. A few grains hidden under fingernails, in hair, in mouth corners. French prisoner Violette Szabo coordinated the operation despite torture that left her unable to walk. They accumulated explosives over months, hiding them in hollowed-out shoe soles. The medical experiment victims showed particular courage. Despite infected wounds and amputated limbs, they participated in sabotage. Zofia Kołodziejska, both legs mutilated by experiments, served as lookout. Maria Grabowska, partially paralyzed from nerve experiments, signaled warnings with subtle hand movements. They knew discovery meant immediate execution. But what more could the Nazis do to bodies already destroyed? The uprising came October 1944. The women had smuggled enough explosives to the men's camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Sonderkommando, I-men Jewish prisoners forced to operate the gas chambers, used the gunpowder to blow up crematorium IV. The explosion killed several SS guards and destroyed the killing machinery. The explosion at Crematorium 4 sent a message that even in humanity's darkest places, resistance survived. The Nazi response was predictable, but the women's defiance wasn't. Under torture, none revealed the gunpowder supply chain. Rosa Robota, Ella Gärtner, Esther Waje-Blum, and Regina Saphirstein were publicly hanged for their role. Witnesses reported they sang resistance songs on the gallows. The medical experiments continued, but now the doctors faced sabotage. Women switched medical charts, contaminated cultures, and damaged equipment when possible. Liberation revealed the experiment's scope. Soviet forces found 7,000 survivors at Ravensbrück, many permanently disabled from medical torture. The rabbits testified at Nuremberg, showing their scars to the court. Dr. Gebhardt was executed, but most experimenters escaped justice. The women formed support networks, helping each other navigate post-war life with mutilated bodies. They insisted on being called Ravensbrück warriors, not victims. Those who survived the camps would face new horrors when liberation brought Soviet soldiers to Manchuria. Yuki's father bowed deeply as he offered his 14-year-old daughter to the Soviet commander. Take her, spare the rest. August 1945, Harbin, Manchuria. The Japanese colony's defeat brought Soviet occupation and a terrible calculus. Japanese families faced a choice: sacrifice one daughter or watch soldiers take them all. Yuki Tanaka stood in her best kimono, trembling as her father negotiated her body for her sister's safety. The term comfort women sanitizes what happened. These weren't volunteer prostitutes, but sacrificial offerings from defeated families. Fathers, brothers, and community leaders selected which girls to surrender. They chose based on cruel mathematics: older daughters who'd already lost value through rape, prettier girls who might satisfy more soldiers, or simply whoever seemed strongest. The chosen girls were delivered to designated buildings, which everyone pretended were comfort stations rather than rape centers. The numbers tell only part of the story. Historians estimate 10,000 Japanese women and girls were systematically raped in Manchuria during the Soviet occupation. Ages ranged from 13 to 25, though soldiers showed no real age preference. What the numbers hide is the family involvement. Unlike the chaos of conquest rape, this was organized sacrifice. Communities held meetings to decide which daughters to offer. They created rotation schedules. They enforced participation. Yuki's younger sister watched from behind the door. Yuki's 11-year-old sister Keiko would later describe the sound of their father's footsteps returning alone. The family never spoke of Yuki again. Her belongings disappeared. Her name was erased from conversation. But Keiko knew. Every family on their street had made similar choices. The Yamadas sent their eldest daughter. The Watanabes sent two. The childless widow Sasaki was deemed communal property. Here's what made Manchurian sacrifice particularly cruel. It came from within. No Soviet soldier forced Yuki's father to choose her. The Japanese community self-organized this system, believing controlled sacrifice would prevent random violence. They were wrong. Soldiers took the offered women and still raped others. But the myth of protective sacrifice kept families complying. Fathers convinced themselves they were protecting their households. By morning, 17 girls from the village had vanished. The designated buildings became processing centers for human sacrifice. Japanese community leaders managed schedules, ensuring fresh girls arrived as others became too damaged to function. They enforced hygiene rules, not for the girls' safety, but to prevent disease among soldiers. They disposed of bodies when girls died from internal injuries. They recruited doctors to perform abortions on pregnant children, all while maintaining the fiction that this organized sacrifice protected the community. Some girls found ways to resist. They shared suicide methods, NS, which pills worked fastest, how to tie effective nooses with kimono belts, where to cut for quick death. They warned newcomers which soldiers were most violent. They created distraction networks, helping some escape during shift changes. But escape meant family shame. Better to die honorably than return home defiled. The community enforced this code through silence and rejection. The occupation lasted until 1946, but the sacrifice's effects lasted generations. Survivors faced complete social exile. Families refused to acknowledge returned daughters. Marriage became impossible. Many committed suicide years later, unable to live with memories and rejection. Those who survived often never spoke of their experiences, which brings us back to Chittor, where 8,000 women decided flames were preferable to what conquerors would do. Every woman in your bloodline faced at least 5 near-death experiences: childbirth, disease, violence, starvation, and systematic murder. Think about that calculation. Your great-great-grandmother survived childhood diseases that killed half her sisters. She survived childbirth when maternal mortality reached 40%. She dodged the violence that claimed 1 in 3 women. She escaped the famines that particularly targeted female children. She wasn't accused of witchcraft, wasn't institutionalized, wasn't selected for sacrifice. The compound probability is staggering. Take just 10 generations, roughly 300 years. Each woman needed to survive to reproductive age, successfully give birth, and raise at least 1 daughter to adulthood. The mathematical odds? If each generation faced just a 50% female survival rate, your existence probability is 0.5 to the 10th power, roughly 0.1%. But historical female survival rates were often much worse. The Black Death alone should have ended your line 14 times. Consider specific historical bottlenecks. The European witch hunts created localized female extermination events. Some German villages lost 90% of their women. If your ancestress lived in one of these villages, she belonged to the 10% who somehow avoided accusation. How? Maybe she was too young, too connected, or simply lucky. But she survived when probability said she shouldn't. But here's the calculation that will stun you. Your female lineage survived every historical horror we've discussed. When Victorian factories poisoned women with lead, your ancestress either avoided factory work or survived the poisoning. When medieval convents promoted starvation, she either stayed secular or maintained enough nutrition to reproduce. When witch hunters sought victims, she evaded suspicion. When armies conquered, she escaped or endured. When doctors experimented, she wasn't selected. When communities demanded sacrifice, she wasn't chosen. The survival strategies varied but shared common elements. Women created information networks, warning each other of dangers. They developed protection systems, hidden food supplies, escape routes, coded warnings. They learned which behaviors attracted violence and which promoted invisibility. They passed this knowledge through whispered conversations, encoded in lullabies and fairy tales. Your ancestresses were survival experts in hostile environments, but survival came at costs we can barely comprehend. Women learned to perform submission while maintaining inner resistance. They developed split personalities, public compliance masking private defiance. They chose strategic marriages to dangerous men for protection from worse men. They abandoned some children to save others. They informed on friends to protect families. They made moral compromises modern women can't imagine. Now we return to Chittor, where the flames have been burning for 6 hours, and the last group approaches the fire. The flames at Chittor had been burning for 6 hours when the final group approached. These were the grandmothers, some carrying infants whose mothers had already entered the fire. The pyre had consumed thousands, yet still burned with terrible efficiency. The Rajput women had planned this carefully, enough wood to ensure complete cremation, preventing enemy soldiers from defiling even their corpses. Padmini, aged 67, led this final procession. She'd orchestrated the entire jauhar, from stockpiling wood to organizing the procession order. She carried her newest grandchild, born just days before. The baby slept peacefully, drugged with opium to ensure no crying. Around them, the fort's walls shuddered under Alauddin Khalji's assault. The defenders were falling, time was running out. The sounds created a horrific symphony, crackling flames consuming silk and flesh, distant war drums marking the siege's rhythm, prayers from thousands of female voices growing fewer each moment, stone crumbling as enemy catapults found their marks, and underneath it all, the soft lullabies grandmothers sang to infants about to die. The orange glow painted shadows on fortress walls, shadows that would burn into historical memory. These final women had lived through multiple sieges. They'd seen what conquering armies did to captured women. Padmini herself had witnessed the aftermath of Ranthambhore's fall. Fard. Women returned as walking corpses, minds shattered, bodies destroyed, begging for the death they'd been denied. She'd made her choice decades ago. When Chittor fell, she would ensure no woman suffered that fate. The other grandmothers had agreed. They would shepherd every female soul into the flames rather than leave even one for the conquerors. As they approached the pyre, some women tried to push infants into the arms of those already processed, hoping someone might save them. The grandmothers gently but firmly returned each child. This was mercy, they insisted. Quick death in loving arms versus slow torture in enemy hands. They'd calculated precisely 8,000 women and girls, from the queen to the poorest servant. Not one would remain for Khalji's army. The enemy soldiers breached the gates to find only ash. Where they'd expected to find women to enslave and rape, they found a massive funeral pyre still smouldering. The silence was absolute. No crying children, no pleading women, no sounds of life at all. Some soldiers vomited at the scale of self-immolation. Others cursed, realizing their prize had chosen death over submission. 8,000 genetic lines ended in those flames. 8,000 stories, skills, dreams, and possibilities converted to ash in a single morning. But you're reading this because your female ancestors made different choices, or never faced such choices at all. Somewhere in your lineage, a woman stood at the edge of similar flames and stepped back. Or she hid while others burned. Or she lived in a place where mass suicide never became logical. Or she survived capture and somehow rebuilt a life from whatever remained. You exist because thousands of women in your bloodline navigated history's attempts to erase them and found narrow paths to survival. Think about what that means. Every woman in your ancestry faced moments when death seemed preferable to life, when society structured itself to make female existence unbearable, when laws, religions, medicines, and communities conspired to destroy women's bodies and minds. Yet somehow, through luck or cunning or sheer endurance, they survived long enough to create the next generation. You are the mathematical impossibility, the product of thousands of women who should have died but didn't. The women at Chittor made their choice based on available options. Death by fire seemed preferable to death by torture. They chose their ending rather than letting enemies write it. But their mass suicide also represents history's ultimate failure, creating conditions where 8,000 women simultaneously decided that no future was better than the future offered. That's the real horror. Not the flames themselves, but the world that made flames seem merciful. We live in a time when such choices seem impossibly distant, when mass female suicide sounds like mythology rather than history. But the structures that created Chittor's flames evolved rather than disappeared. They transformed into subtler violence, WEME, economic dependence, medical control, legal discrimination. The flames became metaphorical, but women still burn. Understanding history's worst moments for women isn't about dwelling in horror. It's about recognizing how many of our ancestors walked through hell and somehow emerged on the other side. You exist because they did. That survival, against mathematical odds and historical horrors, might be humanity's most unlikely miracle.